I'm Margaret Thompson. I'm an NDSUG fellow and PhD candidate at the University of Washington in Seattle. I want to do a quick word association. So I want you to think of the first one or two adjectives, you don't have to say them out loud, that come to mind when I say healthcare. Okay, so everybody's got them? So raise your hand if your adjective had anything to do with the word convenient. Okay, so nobody thinks of convenience when they first think of healthcare. What about personalized? That's in the title, so okay, we've got a couple people who read the title. Okay, what about adaptive? Okay, so also not really thought of. How many of you have seen one of these before? Okay, pretty much everybody. So this is a pill organizer. If you have a number of medications, you might use it to organize what you need to take throughout the week. Some of them have extra rows if you need to organize it by time of day. And I think this is a good example of current approach to convenience and personalization in healthcare. So this is personalized on an individual basis. You put your own medications in at whatever particular times. But you know, it's not really adaptive to your day. Let's say that you have some meetings or something and maybe something comes up, you need to switch what time you were going to take a pill. This isn't really easily designed to do that. And so I think the question that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as I go through the presentation is how can we develop healthcare that responds to our moment-to-moment needs? Not something that we have to set up a week in advance and hope that it works for the whole week. And the test case that I want to use for this is called deep brain stimulation. So deep brain stimulation is an FDA-approved treatment for neurological movement disorders like Parkinson's disease and essential tremor. It consists of implanted pulse generator and then a set of electrodes that go to a certain brain structure. And you can think of it like a pacemaker for the brain. So it delivers safe levels of electricity that control symptoms such as tremor, difficulty initiating movement, etc. And how it works for a patient is they go in for their surgery, they get their implanted pulse generator put in below the clavicle, and then their electrodes are implanted in the brain. They go home, they heal from the surgery, and then they come back in after they've healed, and they go through a programming session with their neurologist. The programming session, or tuning session, the neurologist works to find a set of electrical parameters that work for that patient in order to control their symptoms and not aggravate side effects. And so they'll sweep through different frequencies, different voltages, in order to find a set of parameters that works. And so in that way, deep brain stimulation is personalized on a patient-to-patient basis. But there's a problem with this because once you set those electrical parameters, the person goes home and has to live with those settings at a fixed level all the time. And that may not be appropriate for every situation. It can also waste battery. So especially for essential tremor, the symptoms are intermittent, and they would only happen when the person is engaging in a task using their affected limb. So they don't really need the stimulation on all the time. So my lab at the University of Washington kind of asked, how can we make this technology more adaptive? And we're working on a new paradigm for deep brain stimulation, which we're calling closed-loop deep brain stimulation. So closed-loop deep brain stimulation uses sensing of either wearable technologies like an accelerometer on your wrist, or it can sense from implanted electrodes, so measuring your brain signals, in order to determine when it's appropriate to apply stimulation. And then we would only apply stimulation selectively at those times. This has the potential to save a lot of battery life by not applying stimulation when the person doesn't need it. And it can also reduce unnecessary exposure to side effects. So I just wanted to show an example of one of our patients who we've been working with for a couple years now. So he has had his device implanted. He's been tuned for his open loop stimulation, or the traditional constant stimulation. And we've also worked to develop a closed loop algorithm specifically for him. So in the first video, you'll see kind of his baseline state. This is what he was like before he received his surgery, and he's engaged in a spiral drawing task. So you can see he's shaking a lot as he's drawing the spiral. He had a lot of trouble writing checks and feeding himself at home, so it was pretty debilitating for him. Then with the constant stimulation, you'll see that with the settings that he's been programmed with, he is able to draw the spiral smoothly. So this is with stimulation on all the time. It's not adaptive. So once he's done drawing the spiral, the stimulation doesn't turn off, even though he doesn't need it anymore. When I show you the closed loop video, it's a little bit anticlimactic because it's going to look exactly the same as the constant stimulation, but I'll show you on the next slide. I'll just jump to this slide. On this slide, you'll see how our algorithm is working. So on the bottom plot is the neural spectrogram. So this is the signal that we're using to trigger changes in stimulation. It's going to just look like a bunch of colors to you, but what you want to watch is when he moves his arm, that the red bar at the bottom will go away. That's taken from his motor cortex. That's the power in the lower frequencies desynchronizing and allowing him to move his arm. So that's kind of the signal we're watching for. The middle plot is the applied voltage. So that's just showing the output from our algorithm saying whether to stimulate or not. And then the plot directly below the video is just a ground truth gyroscope measurement taken from his wrist. So there you can see he lifts his arm, the neural spectrogram desynchronizes. You can see a little bit of tremor happening right when he gets his hand up to his face, and that's as our stimulation is kicking on. But we soon mitigate that tremor and then keep the stimulation on for the remainder of the time that he has his arm lifted. So I'll play that one more time for you just so you can kind of catch it again. So again, it shakes a little bit as it's getting started and then levels out, and he's able to smoothly hold his hand at the position that he wants. So this has enabled our patient to go back to work part-time, which he wasn't able to do before. So through our studies, we found we can save at least 50% battery life in our in-clinic studies. We're now translating that to out-of-clinic to see how it works in the real world. But the point here being that closed-loop DBS in this paradigm can save battery life and extend the time between surgeries. So every time the person's battery dies, they have to go in for a replacement surgery. And theoretically, it can also reduce exposure to side effects. Side effects include trouble speaking and skin tingling, maybe eye twitching. But I think we can do better than just this method of closed-loop DBS. And the reason I say that is because this method of closed-loop DBS isn't sensitive to context. So as an example, let's say that I have an implanted stimulator and my phone rings and I go to answer it. And one of my side effects is trouble speaking. So my stimulator, even as I reach up and hold my phone, my stimulator turns on because it knows that it's waiting for when I move my hand. But momentarily, I want to tolerate a little bit of tremor in order to be able to speak clearly to the person on the line. I have no way of doing that, and my stimulator has no way of knowing that I would like to momentarily kind of switch which side effect or symptom is prioritizing. So we need a way for the patient to be able to communicate back to the device, hey, I would like to do the other thing now, or I'd like to change the control signal. So how can we do that? That technology actually already exists in the form of a brain-computer interface. So brain-computer interfaces, for those of you who aren't familiar, read some intentional signal out of the brain in order to do a task. And oftentimes they've been used to demo moving cursors on the screen. Recently, a group in Ohio used it with someone who is paralyzed to play guitar. So they have a lot of kind of diverse possible applications like prosthetics. But I think there's an easy application here where we could just use it as a control switch to turn on and off stimulation. So the person can intentionally think to themselves, okay, I want stimulation to turn on now, or okay, I'd like to turn it off in order to speak clearly, something like that. So there's obviously issues of cognitive load here. Is it too taxing on the patient to be thinking about turning this switch on and off? Do we want to maybe swap back and forth between the automatic and the manual methods, something like cruise control? These are all questions that I'm looking into now. So my specific iteration on the big question is, can BCI technology help personalize on a moment-to-moment basis healthcare in the case of closed-loop DBS? And I'm excited to find out. So this sort of research takes a big team, so I'd like to acknowledge my team, especially recent Dr. Brady Houston, who just got his PhD and worked on the classifiers behind the videos that I showed you. I work at the Center for Sensory Motor Neural Engineering at the University of Washington, and I'm an NDSEG fellow through the Department of Defense. So thanks for listening.